I am Pocho Salcedo. Greetings to our viewers, content distributors, TV stations in Latin America, and those tuning in from coast to coast across the continental United States and Hawaii. Here in New York, we are ready to decode the stories that shape our world. This is not just the news. This is the DNA of the news. In October of 2023, Hamas' devastating attack on Israel triggered a brutal war in Gaza. The military response has led to a humanitarian catastrophe with over 40,000 reported dead and over 80% of Gaza's population displaced, and the fate of over 100 hostages remains unknown. Negotiations have not succeeded in a ceasefire or hostage release. The conflict escalated to Iran-backed militias when Israel engaged Hezbollah in Lebanon and the Houthis in Yemen. Iran has shot hundreds of missiles directly to Israel, and Israel has devised a very strong response. We will explore the reasons behind these events and examine whether there are viable avenues for a lasting resolution. We have a world-class expert joining us to provide insights on the matter. Professor Aurel Braun, welcome to the DNA of the News.
Thank you very much.
Aurel Braun is currently a professor of international relations and political science, and fellow and senator of Trinity College at the University of Toronto. He is also an associate of the Davis Center at Harvard. Between July 2012 and June 2015, he was a visiting professor teaching in the Department of Government, Harvard University. Professor Braun has twice been appointed a visiting scholar at the Hoover Institution, Stanford University. Braun received his PhD in International Relations from the London School of Economics. Professor Braun has published extensively on international relations and strategic studies and is a specialist in international law. He is the author and/or editor of several books.
Professor Braun, it is a great honor for us to have you again on the show. And as usual, we will take you right to the deep end of the pool. The Gaza Strip, Lebanon, Yemen, Iran, Israel, and just it seems everybody in the Middle East are in a period of crisis and have been there for a long time. How did we get there?
It is indeed important to look at the specifics and also to think out of the box and look at the larger picture and all the interconnections. So if I may start with the most proximate cause. And this was the horrific massacre perpetrated by Hamas on October 7th of 2023. And I think sometimes the specifics are important in that because this was directed in part against partygoers who were celebrating a peaceful concert. And the brutality of it was so horrific, the systematic rape of women, the burning of entire families. Not only that, but the celebrations, that they so completely offended the conscience of the world that President Biden said that what Hamas did was worse than what ISIS had done. And Hamas also had promised that if they had the opportunity, they would do this over and over again. But we also need to look at the reaction that took place immediately because two crucial principles were enunciated by the Quint. This is the top 5 democratic countries in the world: United States, Britain, France, Italy, and Germany. And the statement that they issued established two crucial principles that we must not lose sight of because I think it is essential in understanding not only what happens in the Middle East, but also in other parts of the world that are beset by armed insurrection or terrorism. And the first principle they laid out was the following, if I may quote: we make clear that the terrorist actions of Hamas have no justification, no legitimacy, and must be universally condemned. There is never any justification for terrorism. So that was the first principle enunciated by the leaders of these 5 big democracies. The second principle was that Hamas does not represent the aspirations of the Palestinian people, that Hamas offers nothing for the Palestinian people other than more terror and bloodshed. And this is the crucial context. Now, we also then need to understand that what happened in Gaza and that this attack could not have taken place without the encouragement, the arming, the training provided by Iran. And Iran, of course, uses proxies. And so Hamas was not merely a proxy, they had their own aspirations, but certainly in the case of Hezbollah, which then attacked Israel the second day on October 8th, they are largely a proxy, and they largely have also destroyed Lebanon, and the Houthis in the case of Yemen. And then we see Iran, which is involved in all sorts of parts of the world. It is not only that it supports terrorism, aggression against the Sunni states, against Israel. It has also been seminal in supporting Russia, sending thousands and thousands of killer drones to Russia. And Iran is also very heavily involved in Latin America. It is a key supporter of the regime of Nicolas Maduro. And it does so every day of the year. They issue statements really quite recently, again, not only supporting the so-called legitimacy of the election, which has been disputed just about by any democratic observer, but also telling the Maduro regime that they should hold steadfast, that they should put down any opposition. This is coming from the Iranian regime. And that is crucial, the actions of that regime in understanding what is happening in the Middle East, but also in some other parts of the world.
Thank you very much. It gives us a 10,000-meter view of the problem. I appreciate that. Let's start dissecting, with your help, what are the perspectives of the main stakeholders. For example, Israel. What is, in your opinion, Israel's immediate and long-term objectives in its response to Hamas and Hezbollah attacks? And how does the current government's ideology influence its approach to the conflict?
You have asked a very important question, which incorporates a great deal of complexity, because at one level are the general interests of the State of Israel, which had developed into a very successful, thriving democracy. And on another level, you have a government that is not particularly popular, that is supported by some extremist forces, that makes it rather difficult to sometimes accept some of the pronouncements coming at least from some members of that government. But the overall principle that is guiding Israel has been to ensure the safety of its citizens, as any democracy would. And let's not forget that on October 6th, there was a ceasefire. There were no fighting on the Gaza front. There was no fighting on the Lebanese front, and that ceasefire was broken. We also need to understand that in a conflict, and war is something that democracies often don't appreciate, because we have been rather fortunate in some of the democracies, Canada, United States, that we have had no direct invasions. We have not suffered direct bombardments. And in Europe, there was something called the Long Peace, that is at least Western Europe. And so when we see war, it tended to be something different. But sadly, in a war, people will get injured, they will get killed. And the loss of any innocent life is equal, no matter if it's a life of an Israeli citizen or if it's a child in Gaza. But this is why in war, what is so crucial is intent. Because intent in war makes the difference between barbarism and tragedy. And a democracy intends to protect its citizens. Totalitarian movements, terrorist movements, they intend to destroy others. And this is why the horrific massacres were widely celebrated by Hamas supporters in Gaza. This is what made it so more horrific, that the holding of hostages involved not only physical torture, but also the psychological torture of the families. That the celebrations of Hamas and what they did, and of Hezbollah in Tehran, again indicates this intent, that if Hamas had the capacity, they would have killed every single Jewish Israeli citizen. If Hezbollah would have the capacity, they would do the same thing. In a democracy, there's not a celebration or the death of innocent people, there is the goal to try to focus on achieving certain strategic goals, that is the safety of citizens. More than 60,000 Israelis have been displaced from the northern part of Israel. They cannot return until Hamas is disarmed or disabled, and this is one of the key issues. And so this is where the geopolitics come into it. This is where we have a differentiation in ideologies. This is where it's so important to distinguish between a democracy, and democracies are always flawed. And in any war, there are mistakes made. But I come back to the notion of intent. And this is where there's a crucial difference. And that's what needs to be understood, because we don't understand that we are not effective in fighting the likes of Vladimir Putin. We're not effective in fighting the Maduros of this world, the totalitarianism of Islamist extremism, as well as imperialism coming from Iran. And we disarm psychologically. And democracies, therefore, need to understand both the domestic imperatives and the need to protect lives, but also the necessity to safeguard democracies, to safeguard sovereignty.
Well, thank you very much. And that is certainly a complex situation and a complex answer to a situation like that. We appreciate that. So what were Hamas's strategic goals in launching the October 2023 attack? And what are likely the long-term consequences for the Palestinian people in Gaza and the West Bank?
It is not possible to be absolutely certain about the goals of Hamas, so we are looking at circumstantial evidence. And circumstantial evidence suggests a number of threads. One is the general goal of Hamas, which has always been the destruction of Israel. They're not looking for a two-state solution. They're looking for the elimination of Israel. And let's not forget that Hamas was part of the Muslim Brotherhood, which started basically as a fascist movement, an Islamist fascist movement, which was suppressed then in Egypt and had the larger goals. But at the same time, even though they're Sunnis, they linked up with Iran, and that was really crucial. So there was a congruence of interest where Iran wants to eliminate Israel and Hamas wanted to eliminate Israel. There may have been a more immediate goal as well, that Israel, following up on the Abraham Accords, where diplomatic relations were established with the United Arab Emirates, with Somalia and other, Morocco, they wanted to stop the possibility of normalization of relations between Israel and Saudi Arabia. They had also hoped that Israel then would be attacked not only by Hamas, but Iran, as well as Hezbollah, as well as the Houthis would join in, and they did. But they have not been successful. Hezbollah, which was viewed as a terrorist entity, but also basically one that controlled the government of Lebanon. It had largely destroyed Lebanon. It had devastated Lebanese economy. That Hezbollah would have the capacity to inflict thousands upon thousands of Israeli deaths and tens of thousands of casualties, because they had something like 150,000 to 200,000 rockets. It was shown that Israel was able to defeat that largely. They're still firing rockets, but not at a rate that they can change the strategic picture. In fact, Israel managed to decapitate almost the entire leadership of Hezbollah. So Iran, in a sense, is losing two of their key proxies. In the north, Hezbollah, which has been rendered more and more ineffective. In the south, Hamas, where we saw the death of Yahya Sinwar. So Iran, therefore, launched direct attacks against Israel. And they also used the Houthis. So this is the larger strategic picture, where we have Hamas's aspiration to stop normalization of relations between Israel and Arab states, Sunni Arab states, which had been proceeding. to get its patron, Iran, together with other Iran's proxies, to help them destroy Israel. And so far, they have not succeeded, but they certainly have inflicted terrible damage. And by continuing to hold hostages, they are able to inflict an enormous amount of psychological pain on Israel.
Well, thank you very much. We just started taking the first steps towards seeing this whole situation. We'll be right back. We'll be speaking more about what brought the situation to what it is now and what is the role of the main stakeholders in that region. We are back with Professor Aurel Braun. He joins us from Toronto, Canada, and we are exploring the root causes and the situation today in the Middle East, and particularly in Israel and the neighbors and the forces that are impacting that area. So let me ask you, Professor Aurel, about Iran. What is Iran's strategic interest in the current conflict, and how does it view its relationship with its proxies and other allies around the world?
It is important, I think, to understand that Iran is driven both by an extremist ideology and also by imperial ambitions. The extremist ideology is one that is absolutely fanatical, that is a theology that has brought tremendous oppression to the people of Iran. And that regime actually is very unpopular. If there was a free election, it's unlikely that in a truly free election, this regime in Iran would be able to sustain itself. And this is why they don't have real elections. They eliminate candidates who would truly challenge the regime. And often these kind of regimes are able to hold on to power by looking at external threats as a diversion to the failures that they have domestically. And Iran is no exception to that. It's something out of the toolbox of dictatorships. But Iran, which was Persia, also was a great imperial power. So they're able to draw on those historical notions that they should be a great power, that they should be a nuclear country, that they should control the region. And what you can see is that Iran is also trying to establish an arc of Shia control, that they are largely controlling Iraq because of the failures of the American intervention. They had propped up the regime of Bashar al-Assad and made that regime quite heavily dependent on Iran. And through Hezbollah, they were controlling Lebanon. They're losing some of that, but this is where Iran has tried, in a sense, to intimidate the Sunni states and control others to have that arc of control. And they also linked up with Russia because they get support in terms of armaments, in terms of technology, and they supply Russia with a great many things, and now with China as well. So we are looking at ideology and we're looking at geopolitics. And so this is why Iran would not want to see any kind of reconciliation between Israel and the Sunni states. And the Abraham Accords represented a tremendous threat to Iran, as well as to Hamas and to Hezbollah, because an agreement between Israel and Saudi Arabia, for example, would be revolutionary. Already the agreements with Morocco, we see it yielded fruits. There's something almost inconceivable that Israel now supplying significant armaments to Morocco, which is an Arab state. And Israel has good relations with Somaliland and so on. And this is what they want to stop. So we see all these kind of tensions, which are driven by the character of the Iranian regime. We shouldn't forget that before this Islamist revolution that has brought so much tragedy, not only to the region, but to the people of Iran, Israel, for example, had excellent relations with Iran. And so it's not a natural development that there would be this kind of hostility. It is driven by the character of that regime. And this is why often, if we have to understand external actions, we also need to look at the internal motive forces. Just as in the case of Russia, to understand Vladimir Putin, why he's behaving in such an aggressive way, it is important to understand that he uses external adventures as a diversion from domestic failures. And this is why these kind of dictatorships are so dangerous to their neighbors and to the region.
So you're saying potentially the consequences of the conflict, if they don't go the way that Iran would like to go, then that will be very detrimental to their influence in the region and perhaps across the world?
Absolutely. And it may be the case that Iran has miscalculated. It has invested so much into these proxies. It had counted on the success of these proxies. And two of their proxies now have been very, very badly damaged, Hamas and Hezbollah. So that means they have fewer tools in their toolbox. And reputation and perception in international relations is very, very important. And this is why Iran will try to, in a sense, kind of rejig their policies to try to reestablish credibility, which makes it an even more volatile and dangerous situation. And this is why we see Iran acting not only in the region, but also reaching out to other parts of the world to increase its prestige so the regime can claim that they are influential. What exactly is Iran doing with Maduro? It's at a distant location. One would think there shouldn't be much of an interest, and yet they have invested a good deal of time, effort, and treasure, frankly, to support Maduro and other extreme leftist regimes, because this goes to the impression of power.
You mentioned early on about the Abraham Accords. What role can the Gulf states play now in promoting de-escalation and fostering a more constructive dialogue between Israelis and Palestinians, or they have no role at this point?
If I may try to deconstruct that very important question that you asked, because there are a number of components to it. At one level, in terms of peace, they can play a very, very important role, and they are playing an important role. You will notice that the Abraham Accords have not collapsed under this most stressful kind of situation, more than a year of conflict, which tells us that all the parties which are part of these accords have understood that they have a strong vested interest in it. And that is the best source of stability. That tells us that these accords were organic. They were not just artificial agreements, but rather that they reflected genuine national interests. And that is a crucial development because it means that the Gulf states understand that Israel really is an integral part of the Middle East. It's not going to go away. It's a fantasy that the regime in Iran might have, or Hamas. And that consequently, they have maintained that relationship, and it's possible that this accord will be enlarged. Now, the second part was de-escalation. And it's a frequently used word, and we would all like to see the end of the loss of innocent civilian life. I think any decent human being will applaud that. But we also are confronted with the harsh reality of war and the harsh reality of international conflicts. And that is, if you de-escalate, do you de-escalate exactly to what? Do you de-escalate to having a long-term stable peace? Or do you de-escalate the situation where Hamas or Hezbollah can rebuild in 4 or 5 years, where Iran can reestablish the effectiveness of its proxies? They can go back to the same kind of activity, which Hamas indicated they would be very willing, as I noted, to do over and over again, in which case the escalation would not mean the same thing in terms of effectiveness. So if we define the escalation as leading us to a viable peace, if it leads to not only the citizens of Israel being safer, but as the Quint said, very importantly, that second principle, that Hamas has brought nothing to the people of Gaza, to the Palestinian people, nothing but terror and bloodshed, then in a sense, we need to understand that Hamas is not only holding some Israeli hostages, but it has been holding the Palestinian people of Gaza hostage. And so de-escalation cannot lead to a reestablishment or rejuvenation of Hamas or of Hezbollah. And I don't think it's in the interest of the Gulf states. It's not in the interest of Saudi Arabia. And I think they are fully aware of this. And this is why they have not acted in a way that Hamas and the way Iran had hoped, because it was clearly their hope that the Abraham Accords would evaporate in the case of this kind of stress. And the fact that they did not dissipate is extremely important and tells us something about the future of the region that actually is quite positive, that shows that progress is possible, that offers some hope in a period that is very bleak, extremely painful. And as I noted, the loss of innocent life is something that all of us, any reasonable person, should mourn, and everything should be done, of course, to try to avoid the loss of innocent civilian life.
Well, thank you very much. In the last minute and a half we have, the full position, at least for the United States, has been the consideration of a two-state solution. Your thoughts about it?
It is, in principle, a very attractive idea. But the reality is that you need to have all the parties become committed to this. And when we talk about a two-state solution, it has to be a two-state solution that accepts each other in real, meaningful terms. That kind of two-state solution would indeed be available. But getting there means that you have to build from the ground up, not from the top down.
Well, thank you very much, Professor Braun. It's always an honor to have you, the DNA of the news. And we know that our viewers here in the U.S. and across Latin America also enjoy this, and we have a strong feedback every time you're on the show. Thank you very much, and hope to have you back again soon.
Well, thank you very much for your penetrative and so well-informed questions.
Thank you.